Modern spiritualism is a movement that began in the 19th century, but of course communication with spirit has been here as long as time began. And this modern day movement stems from the United States. Spiritualism is a belief system that encompasses in the SNU, Spiritualist National Union, not just a religion, also a philosophy and a science. The central concept of our organization is communication with discarnate spirit is possible. Communication, that is, with people that we've known who have physically died, but their spirit has been reborn. This communication is, when demonstrated correctly, is beneficial to both the loved one who has passed on and the recipient. We are, as a religion, entirely rational. There is no element of the supernatural. Spiritualism distinguishes itself from the concept of life after death, which is found in other faiths. Our movement has an experiential dimension in its teachings and religious practice. Communication with spirits takes place through people who have unfolded their sensitivity, known as mediums. But in fact, it can also manifest in people who have not developed these powers. In the 19th century, communication was said to have occurred at events called seances. And in the 21st century, most communication takes place either at a public demonstration of mediumship in a spiritualist church or a spiritualist meeting, in groups, or in private sittings with a medium. Now, the validity of spiritualism has always been controversial, partly due to fraudulent individuals, people who have given negative impressions of communications from the other side. But fraud on the part of these religious practitioners is not enough to discredit entirely the religion itself and those genuine mediums who serve the spirit. So during our time together, I'm going to be offering you some thoughts on the subject of rational spiritualism. This is a subject I have studied since the age of 18, although I have had experiences in this field from childhood. It's true, you know, we never stop learning. As Kathy said, I am a minister of the Spiritualist National Union, and SNUi is part of our organization. Many people outside of our organization seem to be surprised when I quote the 7 principles which form the basis of our philosophy, particularly the first, the fatherhood of God, and then the 5th, personal responsibility. The movement encompasses a belief of that eternal life, as we are spirit now with a physical body, and that the individual has to find their own balance between rationality and spiritual exploration. Over the years, spiritualism has progressed in many areas of public life, in particular interfaith. It is only in recent years that we have actually been represented at the Cenotaph in London for the Remembrance Day service. Spiritualist healers who belong to our organization can visit hospitals, hospices, and other establishments of care in the UK at the request of the patient. We can also, as ministers and officiants, visit prisons at the request of the inmates to discuss spiritualism and how it can help them. But this, of course, can only take place with clearance from the Home Office and the necessary training within the SNU. We're also, as ministers and officiants, trained to conduct official services. And at this point, I would like to mention that we were conducting services for same-sex couples before it was a legal service. So although that service wasn't official in the legal sense, it was not illegal, because we as an organization recognize that love between two consenting adults should not have prejudice. The core of spiritualism lies in that communication and that philosophy, that we are here to utilize whatever abilities we have in the service of humanity, regardless of color or creed. So for the spiritual evolution of the individual, I'm going to offer two pathways of progression. The first is the spiritual awakening of self. If you think about it, we do a lot. We feed this body, we clothe this body, we take this body with us on holiday. We do a lot for the body. But what do we actually do for our spirit? And when that awakening comes, and it can come through many different ways, we can join a community of like-minded people. We can read books on spiritualism and the allied subjects. We can take into meditation practices. We can go to discussion groups. We can attend demonstrations of mediumship and services that also include philosophy. And have you ever wondered why the philosophy takes part before the demonstration of mediumship in a divine service? Well, simply it's because the philosophy should build the power for the demonstration. And within those words, there should be a message for everyone in the thoughts voiced in that philosophy to help people during that particular week. And communication, of course, by nature of mediumship, it can only reach a certain number of people. The second pathway is for when people want to investigate further. And the varied program of SNUi has ample opportunities. As an organization, we are aware that there are people who are not internet savvy. So we have many spiritualist churches and centers which hold classes for the sensitive to explore their spiritual awareness. We have churches also overseas that are affiliated to the Union. According to the SNU figures of December 2021, we have 295 affiliated churches within the SNU, and those figures now in 2023, of course, may have changed. We've also got the Arthur Findlay College in Essex, which holds residential courses, as well as the online courses through Zoom. You see, spiritualism in its purest form is here to help spiritualize the individual. We are not an organization who converts people. It has to be an individual awakening and also a pathway of questioning. I am sure many of you here will be familiar with the name Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Someone's got their mic on. Would you be just so kind to mute it, please? So Arthur Conan Doyle. I'm going to quote you something that he said. He said, people ask me, what do you get from spiritualism? He replied, the first thing you get is that it absolutely removes all fear of death. Secondly, it bridges death for those dear ones whom we may lose. We need have no fear that we are calling them back, for all we do is make such conditions as experience has taught us to enable them to come if they wish. The initiative lies always with them. And they have many times told us that they couldn't come back if it were not God's will. And it makes them intensely happy to be able to help and comfort us, to tell us about their happy life and the world in which they now live, and in time we are destined to come. Some people say that only triviality has come through. In affecting recognition, this has some truth. If, for example, some dear one returns to me, he could not prove his identity by discussing high spiritual matters, because that isn't who he would have been on the earth. But he could do so by reminding me of past private experiences known only to himself and to me. I have heard spirit people that have a philosophy, that have the most inspiring knowledge. That too has helped me. The press, though, unfortunately, usually only notice spiritualism when fraud or folly is in question. And they do exist, as in everything. But the press doesn't mention, as a rule, that thousands of cases where consolation and proof has been brought to suffering hearts, that bring important facts, facts that revolutionize lives, both in the religion and in the science. The question of the future is the hope that it will stop making religion a real living thing. It will empower people so that all doubt of God's goodness or of the destiny of mankind will indeed, as fear, will be banished. Since we shall each be in actual touch with what is higher than ourselves, and the communion of spirits will be at last an established fact. So there are some thoughts there from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, a man whose mind was an inspiration for Sherlock Holmes, a devoted spiritualist, a man who propelled our movement in those early years. And on the television in recent years, there have been many programs about hauntings. And we've got some spiritualists who believe in this form of manifestation. Now, I need to make something very clear. It's got nothing to do with spiritualism. In many cases, it is sensationalism, and in some instances, an imprint which has been left in an atmosphere. Untrained sensitives will link into this, and they assume it is communication, but it isn't. For example, some of Henry VIII's wives who were beheaded in the Tower of London, they're not walking around there with their head under their arm, but people who go there, who hear these stories, link into imprints. That's why with imprints, it's always drama, because of the fear that was created in the initial point. And Hollywood discovered many years ago that fear makes money. And when people are afraid, they link into a fear. And I've been to many houses where people have called me, only one very recently, where the grandmother had recently died. And this lady, when she was on the earth, she was deaf. And she always used to watch television, but she would have it as loud could be. And since she died, the family would put on the television and they'd be watching the television quite ordinarily, and the volume will go up. And nobody had pressed the remote. And they had a fear that she was haunting them. I didn't know any of this. And I went into the house, I linked in, and she was just there, not haunting them, telling them that she was around, that she hadn't died, that she was still alive. And using the television, the remote control of the television, as a means of recognition. That was her way of saying, I am here. Spiritualism is the religion of life. And as Conan Doyle said, offers proof that life is eternal. Science tells us that the mind is the builder. And as we think, so we do become. Edgar Cayce, known as the sleeping prophet, said, and I quote, "Perhaps because of the demands of earthly life, we frequently overlook the truest part of ourselves, which is our connection to spirit. Although we possess physical bodies and mental attitudes, ultimately, our deepest connection is to our spiritual source." Frequently, he reminded us that spirit is life, mind is the builder, and the physical is the result. In other words, spirit is the source of our lives. Our mind then focuses that spiritual energy into creative or destructive, positive or negative avenues of expression. The impact of our choices will eventually find expression in the physical realm, affecting our health, our lives, and our relationships with one another. And this again is where our fifth principle comes into play: personal responsibility. From Cayce's perspective, too often we are out of touch with our intention, the why, behind our everyday actions. And for this reason, Cayce recommended that we establish a spiritual ideal to live by consciously establishing this ideal, like love, forgiveness, compassion, service to others. Then we can accomplish a personal transformation with spiritual development as the result. Now, he used the word development. Personally, I prefer to use the word unfoldment. The reason for that is the word development suggests there's an end product. And of course, there isn't. I prefer the word unfoldment because I liken it to the petals of a flower. They unfold in their own time. They react to the light, they fall away, and they come back again. Then we have a man known as Mr. Spiritualism, Maurice Barbanel. By his profession, he was a journalist. And you know, he even wrote his own obituary. Isn't that clever? Making sure everybody got it right. With the assistance of the spirit world, he developed trance speaking, and he worked in partnership of minds with a spirit who was given the name Silver Birch. And they worked together for 60 years. If you want a very good book on the subject of spiritualism, This is Spiritualism by Barbanel. This is Spiritualism. I know you can get it through Amazon. I'm not sure if you can get it through the SNU, but have a look. It's a very, very good book. This is Spiritualism, Maurice Barbanel. I wasn't fortunate enough to witness his mediumship, but you can, if you've not done so already, listen to some of Silver Birch's philosophy on YouTube. These were recorded at the circles that he held. When he was dying, it was reported that Silver Birch entranced him and thanked Barbanel's family for allowing the medium, their loved one, to be his channel. Think of that. The man is dying, physically dying, and yet that power of the spirit overrode that and entranced him to give their thanks. In the obituary, he writes, and I quote, "I was invited to a home circle in a tenement building in the East End of London. Present were a mixture of young and old Jews." I have to say at this point, Barbanel was also Jewish. And he says that all the people present seemed earnest. He goes on to say that the medium was a Mrs. Blaustein, that she went into trance, and a number of spirits with different nationalities would speak through her. And then he says he wasn't impressed because there was no evidence that these, and he says dead foreigners, were actually speaking through her. And at the end, he promised to return, which he did. And there was a similar demonstration by the same medium. He says, "It seemed to me that at one stage of the proceedings, I fell asleep, either through boredom or being tired. When I awoke, I apologized, and I was told, to my surprise, I had been a Red Indian." Now remember, when this was written, it was written in the days before there was political correctness. We would now have to say first generation. And of course, Silver Birch adopted that character and personality. He says, "It was my first mediumistic trance, but what happened was a complete blank to me." So you see, ladies and gentlemen, within spiritualism, this rationale manifests in different ways. And whilst the movement is naturally associated with communication, we also encourage rationality and critical thinking. And here are a few ways in which the rationale manifests. Going back to my previous statement on evidence, we value evidence of survival and the personal experience as a basis of our belief. We seek to validate those experiences through investigation and critical analysis. I can remember many years ago giving a sitting to a gentleman in Boston, USA, and it turned out that he had several relatives who had died in the Holocaust. And when the man started to communicate, all he showed me was watches, all these watches up his arm. He had a long sleeve shirt on, but all these watches were up his arm. And when he was taken away with his family, he got all the watches and thought he could smuggle them up his arm. And of course, that didn't happen. But the person that was having the sit-in didn't know about that. Knew about all the other information, but he didn't know about the watches. He went away and inquired and found out that it was actually a fact. That's not about me. That's about the spirit world, the intelligence of the spirit world. And that man went on to write a book called The Transformation of a Rational Man. So we are encouraging skepticism. We are encouraging open-mindedness and thinking things through, because we have to evaluate that information which is given to us. And when we do, we're not being negative. We are allowing our minds to investigate, like Conan Doyle with Sherlock Holmes. And of course, in the early days, there was a lot of scientific approach as well. And in certain quarters, I believe this is happening again, where some spiritualists actively engage with scientific research and incorporate scientific principles into their understanding, that they seek to bridge the gap between spirituality and science. And a very good medium that was known for this, and I'm trying to think of her name, it's escaped me. I'll come back to that in a minute. And they are exploring how these realms can coexist harmoniously. And there are so many also testimonies of people that have had near-death experiences. You know, people that have been on the operating table, and they've been out the body and they've actually seen what the surgeons were doing. And they've remembered this. And Eileen Garrett is the name of that medium. And they've relayed what has happened, and it turned out to be so. Yes, going back to Eileen Garrett, she was the most investigated medium from a scientific, mental medium, from a scientific point of view in the 20th century. And she actually traveled all over the world because scientists wanted to work with her and study her own mind. She would be able to do things like blind clairvoyance. Sounds like a joke, I know, blind clairvoyance, but where she would be blindfolded and somebody else would be sitting in another room, and she would relay information about their loved ones in the spirit world. Oh, there were so many things. And by birth, Eileen Garrett who's of Irish descent. There is some information about her on the internet, not as much as others, but there is information out there. So it's important to note that whilst we value the rational mind, we also acknowledge that experiential and transcendental aspects of spirituality, because the way a contact, that's the term we use for when a loved one comes and gives information, how you as an individual are hearing that information from your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, it will feel differently to you as it would if it was somebody else's mum, dad, brother, or sister, because we're dealing with emotion. It's the emotional aspect that these dear ones in the spirit world are working with. And so as that mindset, as those trains of thought help us within our research, it should also help us, because remember in the beginning, I said that spiritualism should spiritualize an individual. So that should enrich our life, because we begin to learn not to react in an emotional sense when we are in situations. We learn to listen with the ears of our spirit. We learn to look at situations with the eyes of our spirit, because everybody on the earth has, in some manner, shape, or form, been conditioned. Emotionally, mentally, physically, conditioning has taken place. And so we have to learn, in some cases, to unlearn. And by looking at situations and circumstances with the eyes of our own spirit, engaging that element of our spirit self in any said given condition, we're listening to that higher power. God knows our need, and God knows the needs of those you love in the spirit world. But when we go into that realm of emotion, I'm talking now outside of mediumship, when we go into that realm of emotion, we detach ourselves. We detach ourselves from a source, and that source is our spirit. It is the power of who we are. Remember, we said the mind is the builder. I'm just reminded here by the spirit too to say to you, if the mind is open, the spirit can sing, not literally. But this mind, this logical mind, doesn't help when you are overthinking things in daily life. It is that mind of self, it's that spirit of self that is awakened if you allow it to be. And of course, we can't live our lives in the spirit world. Then we get imbalance. We're here for a reason. We're here to live, we're here to learn, we're here to grow, and none of us are perfect. Because if we were, we wouldn't be here, would we? We wouldn't be in this physical form. We're all born with gifts and talents. And as we live our lives, as we go forward, we discover others. Perhaps there are some of you here in this meeting that never dreamed you would be a medium, or never dreamed you would be able to do A, B, C, D, E, F, or G. But you did, and you are, because you have allowed that power within you that doesn't know inability, it only knows ability. and you give and create a sacred space for the essence of who you are to be alive. Remember, spiritualism, the religion of life. And I want to tell you too about another lady, Estelle Roberts. 40 Years a Medium is the book. And then there's another one, 50 Years a Medium. Strangely enough, it was written 10 years after 40 Years a Medium. But she was another notable trance medium. And she developed her mediumship with a spirit by the name of Red Cloud. Now, during the Second World War, she lived in London. And Red Cloud told her that she needed to pack her belongings and go to a spiritualist church in Oxfordshire. He mentioned a lady's name, and he told her she would be expecting her and that she would be staying there for the duration of the war. Now imagine that. Spirit says to you, pack your bags. You've got to go to this woman. You've got to go to this church in Oxfordshire. Would you do it? Would you really do that? We don't know, do we? Because we're not in that situation. But anyway, she did. So she got to this church, and this woman came up to her and said to her, "Madam, are you Estelle Roberts?" She said, "Yes, I am." And the lady said, "Oh, that's good. Red Cloud came to see me and told me to expect you. Your room's ready." And as predicted, she stayed there for the war. Her house in London was bombed. Estelle Roberts wasn't very happy about that. And Red Cloud told her, "I promised to save you, not your belongings." And there are countless millions of other instances where this mind of the other world has been present and helped people in their daily lives. Gordon Higginson, who was also in the forces, in the army during the war, he told us that he had his battalion and they had to cross a river. And this river, Spirit told him, was a mind. His mates, his battalion, they knew he was a medium. Whether he got ribbed for it, I don't know. But one of his guides bounced a ball, which he could see on the water. He could see, nobody else. So they were all connected to each other. And as he stepped forward, they stepped where he went, and the whole battalion got over that river. Not one mine went off. And Churchill was known to perceive mediums that went to the War Office and communicated and gave help. Montgomery, he too was in contact. And I'm sure now, going off subject slightly, but I'm sure now in the atrocities we're seeing in Ukraine, the Spirit are there doing all they can to help. It's the same message, whether you're a spiritualist or not. The spirit world are not going to say, "Oh, we're only going to help you because you're a spiritualist." They're going to help those people whose minds are open. I went to see a lady today who's, I saw her last week. Her mum's died, a spiritualist, 95 she was, bless her heart. And when I saw them on the first meeting, one of her daughters had to go back up north. And as she was driving, her car went off the road at 70 miles an hour and went through these trees that woman left the accident without a scratch on her. The car was a complete write-off. And she even had an ambulance behind her when this all happened. So she was looked after, you see. And there's going to be skeptics say, oh, well, you know, it's coincidental, da, 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 da. No, there's no such thing as coincidence. The spirit world couldn't stop that accident, but they could help her. And she is a living testimony of that power. One of my mantras has always been, if it doesn't make sense, then it's nonsense. Always look with that mind of the detective. Always look with the rational before you come to any conclusion. If we don't, we can get carried away. Why? Because we want the experience to be true. I knew a gentleman who lived in the Bristol area, and he used to live in Manchester. And he sat with a medium in the Manchester area by the name of Jimmy Gardner. I never met Jimmy Gardner, but Julian Charles, the gentleman I'm speaking of, who relayed these stories to me, I would trust it explicitly. And they used to sit in a garden shed. That was the seance room, a garden shed. And it would be in the dark, and the phenomena would appear. Remember, this was years ago, and this is how they sat then for physical phenomena. There wasn't a red light. There was no light at all. It was in the dark. Jimmy Gardner would be tied in a chair. So there was no suspicion of him moving around. And an object which we call a trumpet, which is luminous, would fly around the room. And when the trumpet would fly, they would be instructed to put this light on. So they could see it, they could see the band. And the spirit would talk through this vehicle. Now, one of the helpers was a little girl who used to live in the Caribbean, and her name was Topsy, and she loved sweets. In particular, she loved jelly babies, which is a soft sweet, and they're all different shapes of, looks like a little person, all different colors. So one night, Julian took a bag of these jelly babies. Nobody knew, lights were off, he put them under his chair. Topsy comes through, talking to the trumpet, and she says, oh, Uncle Julian, thank you so much for bringing the jelly babies. And there was this noise, rustle, 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 and she took, or they were dematerialized. The jelly babies were dematerialized. But at the end of the seance, when they looked under his chair, there were a number of jelly babies left, and they were black. She took every other color than the color of her own skin. And that, when he told me that, I was on the edge of my seat. And then that night, I was staying in a bed and breakfast, and I'm in bed, and I'm saying to the spirit world, that was wonderful, that was such a privilege to see that. I wish I could see something like that. And I saw a light in the corner of the room beginning to flash. And I thought, my God, that was quick. So thinking rationally, you know, thinking now, can't be from outside. The light's so small. And in my mind, this light is getting bigger and it's moving and it's coming towards me. So as you do, I'm talking to it, not in my mind, but vocally. And then I got brave and I went towards a light. It was my Philips razor on recharge. So there you go. You see, that's what I mean about how when we want something to be right, it was my electric razor that was charging. It wasn't the spirit world. I wanted it to be the spirit world because of what Julian had showed me. And I very quickly fell into that trap. And there I am, you know, saying to an electric razor, welcome, friend, you know. So there's my reputation gone down the pan if ever I had one. So you're the healthy skeptic is not being negative, it's being realistic. And then when you build that, if you've not done so already in your unfoldment, what is a belief? What is a curiosity, excuse me, then becomes a belief. Then eventually it becomes a knowing. Spiritualists, we are not anti any other religion. We embrace all trains of thought. But spiritualism gives us a great truth. And that truth must never be clouded with mis-teachings of any dogma. Spiritualism is more than a religion, science, and philosophy. It is indeed, as you know here in this meeting, a way of life. It's important too to understand that when Christ came into this world, he was not a Christian. Buddha was not a Buddhist. Each of these men and many others came into this world on different continents to teach the same truth: compassion, tolerance, and love. And if you find those elements in other religious practices, that's great, because that then is food for your soul. Spiritualist mediums, we are the voice for the voiceless. We are healing channels for those who are lost, lonely, or afraid. We are the light to bring hope in aiding people through their pilgrimage in life, whether they be spiritualists or not. We are here to help each other. Understand that spiritualism can be so much more than that initial contact or communication. We can utilize the power of prayer in our daily lives. We can commune with nature. We can smile more. We can frown less. And you know, once the spirit world said to me, smiles accelerate your spirit, frowns age your skin. They do have a sense of humor, you see, the spirit world. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm coming to the end of my presentation with you before we go into the questions. And just to conclude this presentation, I want to leave you with the following thought. I didn't write this. This is something I saw on Facebook a few days ago. How did we live without Facebook before? Huh? How did we live without Google before? But you know, we did, didn't we? So I'm going to leave you with the following thought. I don't know the author, but when I saw this, I really felt it was so applicable for our meeting tonight. It doesn't have a title, but it says this: when a flashlight grows dim or quits working, do you throw it away? Of course not. You change the batteries. When a person makes mistakes, or they find themselves in a dark place, do you cast them aside? No. You help them change their batteries. Some need AA, attention and affection. Some need AAA, attention, affection, and acceptance. Some also need compassion, some direction, and if they still don't seem to shine, just sit with them. Just sit with them quietly and share your light. Then in turn, you will both be recharged. And I believe, ladies and gentlemen, that is rational spiritualism. Thank you, Kathy.